The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. It was a very busy week in Washington, in the nation, and around the world, and we're going to deal with 4 topics, each of which were very important to your world that you live in. The first 2 occurred in Washington. One is that Paul Ryan, the chairman of the House Budget Committee, presented his new plan, the Republican plan, to cut the deficit, except that it adds another $5 trillion or so to the deficit. In fact, what it does is it takes $5 trillion in Bush tax cuts, which it extends, plus another $5 trillion in tax cuts for the rich. So by increasing the deficit by $5 trillion, the debt I should say, by increasing it about 50%, the question is, how are we going to pay for it all? The answer, well, Paul Ryan doesn't tell us. So if you don't know the details of Paul Ryan's plan, don't worry, Paul Ryan doesn't know them either. Neither do the Republicans. We're going to talk about the plan and its details. The one thing we do know, though, is that he's going to take the money from the very poor. So if you think that the homeless need to give up their blankets because Mitt Romney doesn't have enough of them, you will support the Paul Ryan plan. Then we're going to talk about the Supreme Court's oral arguments. As you know, the Supreme Court devoted 6 hours this week to trying to find some rationale for overturning Obamacare, for overturning the Affordable Health Care Act. It's very difficult to do because there's 4, arguably 5, separate provisions in the Constitution, all of which say this thing is constitutional. But they devoted 6 hours to it, more than they've had in 50 years. Remember, they overturned the presidency. They kicked out Al Gore and put George Bush in with only an hour and a half of oral argument. It shows how hard they're reaching to try to overturn this law. Coming up in the third segment, Trayvon Martin. You know, of course, the tragedy that occurred in Florida. Everyone is talking about it. Their new revealing analysis of the audio tapes, the 911 tapes, that suggest, about 95%, the experts say, that it was Trayvon Martin, not George Zimmerman, doing the screaming. We're going to play some 911 tapes, specifically the famous one, the first one, the one by George Zimmerman, to learn what we can learn about the facts of the case. And finally, we've got the situation in Syria. A massacre, a brutal massacre. It goes on, and the world does almost nothing. Just today, the Arab countries and the United States announced they were giving monetary aid to the people trying to fight to save their lives, but not arming them. I disagree. I don't think it goes far enough. I think we need to be on the side of the people of Syria, and I'm not afraid to say so, even though there's some on the left and the right that think we should stay out. No, I'm not saying we need an Iraqi-style invasion, but when people are being massacred for merely expressing themselves, I think it's the role of the United States and the world to step in. So we've got a lot planned for you today. If you want to call in and add your 2 cents to discussion, I really hope you do. Whatever I'm talking about, I want to hear from you. The number is 571-749-1166, or you can call toll-free from wherever you're watching, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Let's get right to Paul Ryan. So, we have the Paul Ryan plan. And this is an article we can show right here from The Hill. Paul Ryan's plan apparently is a secret plan. You may have heard of Richard Nixon's secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. Well, as The Hill points out, The Hill, of course, is the Capital News newspaper. The Hill points out that it is still a very, very secret plan. He won't give the details of exactly how he plans to balance the budget because, they say, just as with Richard Nixon, it doesn't exist. Here's the important part to understand about the plan. Not only will he extend the debt by $5.4 trillion by extending the Bush tax cuts, but he wants to give an additional $4.6 trillion in tax cuts, which, like the Bush tax cuts, are mostly focused at the very rich. As The Hill points out, that's a cool $10 trillion in tax cuts. But there aren't even close enough cuts to make up that loss of revenue over the next decade. So how does he plan to do it? How's he going to fix it? Well, he won't tell us. He won't give us the details of his secret plan. He says he's going to get rid of some tax breaks. Which tax breaks? The mortgage interest deduction, deductions for charity, deductions for insurance, deductions for local taxes paid. He won't tell us. We don't know. What we do know is he's going to savagely cut any programs that help the poor. He wants to cut the national government from 12% of the gross domestic product, apart from Social Security and defense and Medicare, to 3.5%. He wants to cut the budget 3/4. So, I guess we have to close 3/4 of the national parks, 3/4 of the nation's interstates, 3/4 of the nation's museums. We have to certainly make sure that we cut food stamps from $6 a day to $1.50 a day. If you haven't lived on $1.50 a day, don't worry, the poor won't be able to either. What is the purpose of the Paul Ryan plan? Why have they proposed it? Does anyone think this will pass Congress? The answer is clearly no. Not only would President Obama veto such a plan, it won't even get a majority vote in the Senate, much less enough to get past a Democratic filibuster. What the Paul Ryan plan does is it sets out the parameters of Republican thought, the parameters of what it means today to be a conservative. And if you were a Richard Nixon conservative or a Ronald Reagan conservative, let me assure you, you would be considered an extreme liberal according to Paul Ryan. According to Paul Ryan, the poor in America are not poor enough, and the rich are not rich enough. And even though 93% of all the income earned in the last 5 years went to the top 1%, it's not enough. As I said, there are homeless people that still have blankets, and they can afford to give up their blankets so that Mitt Romney can get, a Caribbean island, maybe two. It sounds extreme. It is extreme. And if you want to know why these details haven't been put forward in the press, well, the answer is quite simple. He won't tell us the details, but he will tell us where it's coming from. It's coming from Medicaid, right? It's coming from welfare programs. It's coming from insurance programs. One thing that we know he'll do is he'll put 34 million Americans right out on the street. And according to the Congressional Research Service, the deductions that he proposes, that's only $570 billion a year. So you've got 10 trillion and you've got 500 billion. He'll tell us about where 1/20th is coming from. Where's the other money coming from, Paul Ryan? He won't say. What we do know is that Mitt Romney has endorsed the budget, Paul Ryan's budget. Santorum has as well, but it doesn't matter. Mitt Romney is going to be the Republican nominee. Now, what is Mitt Romney going to say about this budget? Is he going to admit the truth, which is that he doesn't know what's in the budget because Paul Ryan doesn't know what's in the budget, because the budget itself has nothing in it? Or will he do some kind of finesse like, I didn't really read it and they told me it was good and I don't look at everything I read? Will there be asked detailed questions to Mitt Romney about the Ryan budget? There should be. Paul Krugman points out that when the Heritage Foundation, this is an article in the New York Times, by the way, that when the Heritage Foundation analyzed this, they claimed that magically the economy would grow an amazing amount from these tax cuts. Let's see, they claimed it would grow 2.8%. They claimed it would bring the unemployment rate down to 2.8%. That was on the Heritage Foundation website. And as Krugman points out, there was so much widespread jeering that they actually banished that. They removed that from the website. They're basically just making stuff up. The idea is that the Republicans have, and it's something we've talked about before, is that the budget, by transferring money from the poor to the rich, which Republicans call the job creators, this budget would magically transform the economy so that the unemployment rate goes really low. But is that really true? When you take money from the middle class people and give it to the rich, does it really make the economy richer? Does it make the economy grow? Well, all you have to do is look what happened in the last decade under George Bush. The rich got very, very rich, the middle class stayed even, and our economy basically limped along. Compare that with what happened in 1993 under Bill Clinton. In 1993, you may recall, Bill Clinton raised the top tax rate on the top taxpayers a huge 3.6%. Okay, not that huge. but enough that the Wall Street Journal claimed this would cause our economy to spiral into a deep recession. Because the Wall Street Journal and conservatives teach that when you take money from the rich and give it to the middle class, that redistribution of wealth causes all economies to collapse. The Wall Street Journal was wrong. The 90s were the greatest economic engine America's ever seen. So, how does it work? How are we to understand the economics of it all? Why is it that when the middle class have money, the economy grows, and when the rich have money, the economy doesn't? Shouldn't everyone spend money the same? The answer is no. Economists teach a concept called the marginal propensity to consume, and it sounds like a highfalutin ivory tower concept, but it's really not that complex. What it means is that when you have a ton of money and someone gives you more, you really don't go out and spend it. But if you don't have any money and they give you money, you're likely to spend it. Let me give you an example. Let's say you've got someone who's struggling to get along, and he makes $10,000 a year, and you give that guy $10,000 more for his family. He's going to spend that money, right? His family needs to eat. He needs to pay rent. He's got food bills. He's got car bills. This guy needs the money. That $10,000 is going to go out the door almost as quickly as he gets it, and it will get into the economy, and it will get into grocery stores, and it will get into maybe he'll buy a toy for his kids at Christmas, and then people will have to manufacture more toys, or they'll have to make more of whatever he's buying. That money gets into the economy. Give that same $10,000 to a guy that makes $100 million, he won't even notice it. I mean, Mitt Romney said, for example, that $374,000 was not that much. Because to Mitt Romney, it isn't that much. It's really very simple to understand. For Mitt Romney, $374,000 is nothing. For a poor middle-class person, $10,000 is a lot. Mitt Romney throws that off in a bet, much like you might have in a poker game. That's because Mitt Romney, 10,000 here or there, 100,000, even $1 million here or there, does not affect his lifestyle much. If you take money from the poor and give it to the rich the way Paul Ryan wants to do, they're not going to put it in the economy. Not because they're bad people, and not because anyone hates the rich, but because they already have everything they need. They won't use it. Middle-class people, they need the money. Working-class people, they need the money. Poor people, they need the money. Paul Ryan's plan would not only be extraordinarily cruel, it would not only end Medicare as we know it, but it would drastically harm the economy. It would take us out of our recovery and send us back in a downward spiral. That's why Paul Ryan is wrong. When we come back, we're going to talk about the United States Supreme Court and its ruling on health care. If you want to call in, please do.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org. or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor. It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today can succeed in it tomorrow.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. So the United States Supreme Court had 6 hours of oral argument this week, I should say, just happened a few days ago, on the issue of whether the Affordable Health Care Act is constitutional or not. If a student in law school were to write a paper saying that the act was not constitutional, they would probably flunk out of law school. The reason is quite simple. There are 4, possibly 5, separate provisions of the United States Constitution that say the act is expressly constitutional. 4 of them are found in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. The first is that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. Boom. That's it. The question, just on that, Congress is saying if you do not provide for your own health care and you can afford it, then they can tax you the difference. Before even getting to anything else in the Constitution, that is congressional right. In fact, Paul Ryan, you talked about him, he specifically recognized that right in his plan. Paul Ryan has a plan, and guess what? It's very similar to the Affordable Health Care Act. Now, this might surprise you. It might surprise you to know that Paul Ryan, the author of the Republican budget, is actually proposing Obamacare. He's proposing it? I thought Republicans hated Obamacare. They do hate Obamacare with regard to people under 65. But for people over 65, in destroying Medicare, they're happy to submit Obamacare in its place. Let me explain. There's basically 3 levels of health insurance that you can have in America. You could have the current system, which is the rich get treatment. You know what? I take it back. There's 4 levels. The one level you could have is the level we had in America before the 1980s, the one that exists in some very small, very poor countries. And that is, if you can afford health care, you get it. If you can't afford health care, you die. You go into an emergency room. If you have health care, you get treatment. If you don't have health care, well, hopefully you'll leave yourself in the garbage can so you don't get blood on the floor. They will not take care of you. Now, that has not existed in America since the 1980s. In the 1980s, a Democratic Congress and President Ronald Reagan, passed a law that said that in an emergency, we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure that you don't die just because you can't afford health care. That brings us to the current system, the one that existed prior to the Affordable Health Care Act. Under that system, emergency care is treated, whether you can afford it or not, but preventative care is not treated. So, we're not going to give you heart medication if you need it, even if it only costs $100 a month. Instead, when you complain of a heart attack and your heart stops working, we can take you to the emergency room and give you quintuple heart bypass surgery, which instead of costing $100 a month, will likely cost you $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. Only it won't cost you, it'll cost the taxpayer, because as I said, we have a law that says we're not going to let you die. They're also going to cut open your chest, cut open all your bones, and you're going to have a much weaker heart, and you won't live as long. So you're going to be in a lot of pain. You won't live as long. The taxpayers will be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars, all because we don't want to pay a few $100 for your heart medication. You see how that one works? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Everyone is worse off. The patient's worse off. They're in a lot more pain. They're not going to live as long. The taxpayers are worse off. They're paying a lot more money. Everyone loses. That's our current system. President Obama's plan, of course, takes it one step further. It says, look, because we know that you may have an emergency, because we know that all of us at one point will get sick and die, people are mortal, you know. Because of that, you're going to need health care at some point in your life. Everyone is born, everyone dies, and let's face it, the vast majority of us get sick from time to time. We all need health care. Health care is not like, as Scalia argued, buying broccoli. Healthcare is something we all need. It is something that is lifelong. It is commerce that every person has entered into the market. And people who think that they don't need healthcare are a lot like the people who think they don't need food and the government can't regulate that. And I will concede that you may not need food for 10 or 15 days, but then you're going to need food. Oh, you're not going to be around much longer. The same is true with healthcare. It may not be 10 or 15 days, it may be 10 or 15 years. But even if you're very healthy and in your 20s or 30s, you can be hit by a bus. You can get a brain tumor. You can get cancer. And so what President Obama has done is he's copied a plan that began in some very conservative circles. The Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and installed by the very conservative governor of Massachusetts, a guy you may have heard of. His name is Willard Mitt Romney. He has to be running for president. The idea is very simple. If you can afford to buy health care insurance, you got to buy health care insurance because you're going to need health care sooner or later. It's called the individual mandate. And at the time it was proposed, no one suggested that it couldn't be constitutional. As I said, Congress has the right to tax. I haven't even gotten to the other provisions yet that also make it constitutional. I'll get to them in just a second. So Congress has the right to tax you if you don't provide health care. That's Romney Care in Massachusetts. That's the plan that Hillary Clinton proposed in the election. That's the plan that Barack Obama and Congress eventually adopted. But we could go farther. We should go farther. I mean, all Affordable Health Care Act does is use the current private insurance system and requires people to participate in it. And in fact, many Republicans have complained it's terrible to force people to buy private insurance. There is another way. We could simply have the government tax everyone and provide the insurance for everybody, and then pay the doctors a set rate that they negotiate to get the best price. Has that ever been done before? You betcha. It's called Medicare, and most of you know all about it. You certainly know about it if you're over 65. If you're under 65, you know because your paycheck, a little bit of it goes to Medicare because the government taxes you. They have a right to do that under Medicare. Now, what about Medicare? Do people like Medicare? Maybe some like it, maybe some don't. Let's look at the polls. Well, what do the polls show about Medicare? They show that of the people that get Medicare, 94% of them actually like Medicare. That's pretty good. 94%? I don't know you get 94% of Americans to agree that the earth is round. Maybe you could. But 94% of Americans rarely agree on anything in a very partisan country. So 94% of Americans like this program, which is why Paul Ryan and the Republicans are trying to kill it. Doesn't make much sense politically. But it makes much sense when you understand that government health care, national health care, is the best working health care in the world. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the objective cost. The cost of Medicare, the administrative cost of making the whole program work, taking all that money in from every taxpayer in the United States, distributing it out to each beneficiary, figuring out how much they get, how much the doctors get, how much the drug companies get, and making it all work. You'd think that would take a lot of effort. It does cost 3% of the program. 3% of all the money that goes into Medicare goes to administrative costs, goes to figuring it out who gets what when. Okay, 3%. How does the private sector do it? The private sector doesn't quite reach the level of 3%. No, nor do they reach 5%, nor 10, nor 15, nor 20. The private sector spends approximately 23% on administrative costs. That's right. Medicare is 8 times more effective than the private insurance industry. In fact, the private insurance industry is so scared of having the government be involved in this kind of thing that when President Obama proposed a public option to just let people choose, those of us under 65, whether we wanted Medicare, a government-provided health care service, or private insurance, the private insurance said, no, we can't compete. Medicare is too efficient. Its costs are too low. We can't make a profit. The people who use the public option will get dirt cheap health care that's of excellent quality. And we can't have that in America because we'll go out of business. They brought their cries to the Republican Party and some Democrats, paid them lots of money. And the Republicans and some Democrats heard their cries and said, you're right. You can't possibly compete with the government. If you had to compete with the government, you couldn't make massive profits. And the American people would get very cheap health care of excellent quality at low cost. And you'd be out of business. We can't have that. So they came up with this plan, the Affordable Health Care Act. Better than the current system, but let's face it, not as good as Medicare. So now Paul Ryan, recognizing that there are these levels, right? Let everybody die, provide just for the emergency room, the Affordable Health Care Act, or full national health care, has said, well, we want to back away from full national health care and Medicare because that is socialism, and 94% of Americans like it. And those 6% that don't like it, well, actually, there's only about 3% who don't like it. 3% are unsure. But the 3% who don't like it, well, let's face it, they work for the health insurance industry and they pay for our bills. So, interestingly enough, he wants to propose moving from Medicare to something like the affordable health care system. Pretty interesting, huh? But he won't do it via a tax. You see, what he says is that Obama is giving a penalty if you don't pay. He's going to tax people if you don't pay. And what the Republicans say is because we used the magic word tax, that's the word in the Constitution, and not the unmagic word penalty, which is not in the Constitution, the Democrats lose. The Affordable Health Care Act is unconstitutional, and oh boy, you're just going to have to do it all over again. You may recall what difficulty it was to get the thing passed in the first place. In fact, when Paul Clement, the person representing the states, the Republican states, trying to overturn the constitutionality of the Affordable Health Care Act, when he said, Congress can just do this all over again, the whole court erupted in laughter. Everyone knew that this was something that took 100 years to do, that Teddy Roosevelt had tried, that Harry Truman had tried, that Hillary Clinton had tried, and that it only worked because the Democrats had 60 votes for a few months for a short period of time when the Republicans were filibustering everything. It can't be done all over again, and everybody knows it. So Paul Ryan's plan, it's really very simple. Instead of saying there's no penalty if you buy health care and there's a penalty if you don't buy health care insurance and you can afford it, he would tax everyone and then give a tax credit if you buy the insurance. In other words, it would be exactly the same. Exactly the same. You pay more taxes if you don't have health insurance. You pay less taxes if you do have health insurance. So it's the same either way. One's called a tax, one's called a penalty. Can it really be that the Supreme Court is playing these semantic games? Unfortunately, it is. And that's not the only thing. Because even if you don't look at taxes, even if you look at the next part of the clause, Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes to provide for the general welfare of the United States. Is everyone having health insurance part of the general welfare of the United States? I think that's a pretty easy answer. 50 million Americans don't have insurance. 50 million Americans wonder if they're going to live or die or suffer when they have an illness. They may be able to get out of the emergency room, but they need preventative care. Obviously, it's in the general welfare. And that's a second thing that says it's perfectly constitutional. The third, we're hearing a lot about, that's interstate commerce. We're going to talk a little bit more about that on the break, because it's a bit of a complex question, but I assure you it's part of interstate commerce. And the last one is to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying to execution the foregoing powers. You know what? That's the clause that gives it all away. Anything that makes it necessary and proper for the other things to work. Congress has brought powers under the Constitution. This thing is clearly constitutional. But when we get back, I'm going to play for you Scalia's idea about he would do it differently. You want to call in? 888-488-MARK.
I need a job.
Necesito trabajo.
I would like to speak English better.
Me gustaría hablar inglés mejor.
I want to be a U.S. citizen.
Quisiera ser ciudadano de los Estados Unidos.
For over 35 years,
Por más de 35 años,
the Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Hey, Lena, where's yours?
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease, and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half of it.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop, talking about the Supreme Court's ruling, or specifically their oral arguments, in their attempt to overturn the law passed by Congress to make health insurance affordable for everyone. It's the law that, let's face it, Republicans derisively call Obamacare. If you wanted to call in and discuss this, I want to hear from you. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Prior to the break, I pointed out that the Congress's taxing authority gives its power to do this. Congress's authority to provide for the general welfare gives its power to do this. The necessary and proper clause, the clause that says anything necessary and proper to make these other things work, it can do. That seems like a pretty broad grant of authority, and it is. Let's recall that when the Constitution was first formed, the Federalists, the Founding Fathers, wanted a strong central government. The United States was ruled by the Articles of Confederation from 1783 to 1789, and in those 6 years, the government did practically nothing. It did not have enough centralized power. And the Federalists said in the Federalist Papers, we need more power. We need more centralized power in the federal government. The Anti-Federalists opposed it. The Anti-Federalists argued with the Federalists, and they said, no, that's too much power. We want a limited government. And so they took the issue to the states, and the Federalists won, and the Anti-Federalists lost. Unfortunately, there are 5 Anti-Federalists now wearing robes. They do not like the Constitution of the United States, even though they are sworn to uphold it. They want the Articles of Confederation limited government system. They don't like the idea that Congress should have power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying to execution the foregoing powers. I mean, if Congress has the power to tax, to provide for the general welfare, don't you think it could give, a penalty if you don't buy health insurance? Particularly given that if you don't have health insurance and you have an emergency, all the taxpayers would pay for it? So can't they make a law necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers? I think so. The Constitution says so. So why do Scalia, Alito, Roberts, Thomas, and Kennedy, he's sometimes a swing vote, but I think he's on the wrong side of this one. Why do they support the Anti-Federalists, the Anti-Constitutionalists? Well, let's face it, they support them because the Republicans did not vote for this bill. Even though it came from a very conservative source, even though it came from the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, and Mitt Romney, all of whom were determined to prevent us from having a national health care system. We talked before the break about you could have a national health care system like Medicare with a very low administrative cost that works very well and has 94% of Americans approve of it. You could have the Obamacare system where you get subsidies to pay for private insurance companies, and there's an individual mandate. You're required to buy health insurance. You could have the current system where we pay for people with emergency care and we make all taxpayers pay for it, which really isn't much individual responsibility. You would think conservatives would prefer Obamacare over the current system. Or you could have the system that Scalia proposes. See, Scalia suggests that we were wrong to even provide for people with emergency care. And he says that basically we should go back to the way it was prior to the 1980s, when we had Ronald Reagan say that we can provide for people in an emergency. Let me play for you an exchange between Justice Scalia and General Donald Verrilli. He's the Solicitor General of the United States, precisely on this point.
You could say that about buying a car. If people don't buy cars, the price that those who do buy cars pay will have to be higher. So you can say, in order to bring the price down, you are hurting these other people by not buying a car.
That is not what we're saying.
That's not Scalia. That's not what you're saying. I thought it was. I thought you were saying other people are going to have to pay more for insurance because you're not buying it.
No, it's because you're going in the healthcare market. You're going into the market without the ability to pay for what you getting the healthcare service anyway as a result of the social norms that allow that to which we've obligated ourselves. So people
don't obligate yourself to that. Why?
I can't imagine that the Commerce Clause would forbid Congress from taking into account this deeply embedded social norm.
You can do it, but
now, did you catch that? Because it's a little obscure. I want to make sure you caught it. All right. General Verrilli is saying, hey, it's not like buying a car, because if you go and you get emergency care, then everyone has to pay for it. You know, if I choose not to buy a car, I choose not to buy a car. Society doesn't have to buy me a car. There's no law that says that if Mark Levine doesn't buy a car, that you, the taxpayer, have to buy me a car. But there is a law that says that if I, Mark Levine, go to the emergency room and I don't have money to pay for my emergency care or health insurance, that yes, you, society, you, the taxpayer, are all going to pay to prevent me from dying. Scalia says, let them die. Let them die. If you get hit by a car and you don't have health insurance, crawl away and please don't leave blood on the road because society has to clean it up. And you know what? Justice Scalia is absolutely right in this sense. We are not required by law to help someone who's dying. There's no requirement. If you are walking on the road and you see someone say, help, help, I'm dying, get me an ambulance, you can legally walk along the way. That's not true, by the way, in France. In France, I don't know if you know this, in France, there's a Good Samaritan law. And if you see someone scream, help, help, I'm dying, can you please call me an ambulance? And you don't call an ambulance, and you can be actually legally prosecuted. Not true in America. In America, we have the freedom to completely ignore someone dying and calling for help. And Scalia is saying that's the way America should be. If someone's screaming and dying for help, they shouldn't have gotten in that position to begin with. They shouldn't have gotten hit by a bus. They shouldn't have gotten a brain tumor. They shouldn't have gotten cancer. They should have provided for themselves by getting insurance to begin with. And rather than have the government oppress us by taxing us $95, that's what it is in the first year, $95 to encourage everyone to buy health care, that $95 is oppressive. Letting sick people die is not oppressive. And let's face it, 22,000 Americans died just last year from not having health insurance. Scalia says there can be more. We as society can make more. What Scalia doesn't understand, though, is that the United States Congress, under Ronald Reagan, although it shouldn't matter which president, passed a law in the 1980s that said we do take care of people in an emergency. And most Americans support that law. Most Democrats, most independents, even most conservatives, most Republicans support that law. Although I must admit, there are some in the Tea Party that believe like Justice Scalia. I don't know if you saw that debate with Ron Paul, where they asked Ron Paul what to do about someone needing emergency care, and someone from the audience screamed, "Let them die!" Well, there are people who believe like Justice Scalia, but they're the minority in America. And the Democratic majority is supposed to be able to pass these laws. Scalia does not like the law that says that we have to have the humanity to take care of someone who's dying. He doesn't like the law, and because he doesn't like the law, he wants to kill the Constitution. He wants to kill the law passed by the Democratic representatives of the American people, the law that we call Obamacare. You heard his solution. Just get rid of that other law that says we have to provide for people in emergency. But once you have to provide for people in emergency, it makes perfect sense. People are already in commerce. Everyone needs health care. And therefore, what do we have to do? We have to make sure that people pay for it if they can. If they can't pay for it, there are very generous subsidies in the law to make sure that everyone can afford health care. It will never go up to more than 2.5% of your income. And let's face it, that's not bad. For a lot of Americans, health care is way more than 2.5% of your income. I did mention there's a fourth argument. I'll mention it briefly, then we have other topics to get to. That is the Interstate Commerce Clause. That's actually the easiest. I raised the other three first because everyone was talking about the Interstate Commerce Clause. Let me just be very clear. Congress has the power, under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, to regulate commerce among the several states. It's a pretty broad power. It's such a broad power, in fact, that when racists in the South said, we don't want to serve black people, they said, you know what? We can force you to do it. We can force you to do it with the Civil Rights Act, which is legal under the United States Constitution because of the Interstate Commerce Clause. Because we can regulate commerce, we can say that you're forced to sell to black people even if you don't want to. What is the conservative distinction? They say, Oh, yes, you can be forced to sell something. You just can't be forced to buy something. Does that make any sense? If Congress can force you to sell, why can't Congress force you to buy? And then they say, as Scalia did, oh, well, then they can force you to buy broccoli and buy cars. Look, the power to have a law means the power to have stupid laws. I happen to think this is a good law. So did the vast majority of the Americans' elected representatives. They got 60 votes in the Senate. They got the majority of the House, right? Congress thought it was a good law. Could Congress pass bad laws? You betcha, Scalia. Congress could pass bad laws. And if Congress passes a law to make everyone eat broccoli, I will be the first to oppose that law. But the answer is the Constitution is not about saying, don't pass bad laws. The Constitution is about whether or not the Congress has the power to pass anything at all. And clearly, Congress has this power. To give you an example, let's cite Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia said back in 2005, in a case involving California's medical marijuana statute. California, the voters, in fact, the majority of Californians had voted to allow marijuana to be used for medical uses. And there was a woman who was in excruciating pain, who decided to grow marijuana for her own use, promised that she wouldn't sell it to anybody else, and she used it to prevent her excruciating pain. Her name was Angel Rach. And California said, fine, it's perfectly legal under state law, and if you believed in states' rights, you'd leave California alone. But the federal government passed a law banning marijuana for any use whatsoever, and they did it under the Interstate Commerce Clause. Now, this is actually a tougher question. She's growing the marijuana for her own use. How does that affect interstate commerce? I think a reasoned argument can be made that it doesn't affect interstate commerce. I think a reasoned argument can be made that the federal marijuana laws are unconstitutional. But Scalia wouldn't hear of it. Scalia said, yes, she says she's not going to sell it, but she might sell it. That marijuana is just steps away from the interstate market. And because of that, we can ban it. So understand what Scalia is saying. A woman using marijuana for her own use who promises not to sell it because she could sell it in the interstate market, Scalia says that's regulating interstate commerce. But healthcare, 1/6 of the nation's economy that goes in every state, that's used by every single American, unlike this one American using marijuana, that apparently, according to Scalia, is not interstate commerce. Because yes, you can force people to sell things, and yes, you can force people not to sell things, and yes, you can tell people not to use marijuana for their own use, but you can't force people to buy health insurance even though everybody needs it. It doesn't make any sense. Everyone studying this in law school knows it doesn't make any sense. But what do we have here? We have Justice Scalia, Alito, and Thomas, quite possibly Chief Justice Roberts, and Justice Kennedy as well, who are putting their politics ahead of the Constitution of the United States. What they did in Bush v. Gore, Citizens United, I fear it's going to happen in this case. You want to call in 888-488-MARK. When we come back, Trayvon Martin and the situation in Syria.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I want to talk about Trayvon Martin. If you want to call in, this is your last chance to do so. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. I really want to talk mostly about George Zimmerman. When you study what he did and what Trayvon Martin did, I don't think you can come to any conclusion but that Trayvon Martin was looking to get home, looking for safety. George Zimmerman was looking for trouble. Now, we may never know exactly what happened that night, but we do have the 911 calls, and we do, in fact, have new evidence by two separate experts, including the head of the, I don't remember the name, it's something like the audio recognition technology service, the experts at examining when you hear a voice, who it belongs to. They've enhanced 911 tape, and they've said with at least 95% certainty that the voice on the tape screaming for help was not George Zimmerman. I have to say, I'm not surprised by this. We need a full investigation. Frankly, we need a trial. But it seems clear to me that Trayvon Martin was not looking for trouble that night, and George Zimmerman was. And that's, I think, the heart of the issue here. People are saying, oh, maybe Trayvon Martin attacked George Zimmerman. I didn't see it. I wasn't there. But George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watchman with the itchy trigger finger. He was out. He was looking for trouble. And I'm going to play for you the 9/11 tape in just a second. Trayvon Martin, he was watching the All-Star basketball game. He went out in the intermission in the to get a drink, to get an Arizona iced tea and some Skittles. He was trying to find his way back to an apartment that he did not know very well, because it was his mom was with her fiancé, and he'd never been there before. So, you know these gated communities, you know these apartments. He's looking around, he doesn't recognize where he is, he's trying to find the right place, and he's trying to get back home to watch the second half of the game. Trayvon Martin, it seems to me, by all accounts, is a very typical 17-year-old, doing nothing wrong, carrying nothing but iced tea and Skittles. He was not looking for trouble that night. What about George Zimmerman? I want to play for you the entire 911 tape. We have time to do it. The entire 911 tape, I want you to hear, and I'll comment on it after you listen. Probably during as well.
Sanford Police Department, line is being recorded to Sean.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. It's Retrieview Circle. The best address I can give you is 111 Retrieview Circle. This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white collar?
Now, catch that. He looks like he's up to no good. He looks like he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking about. As if walking about in the rain is somehow wrong, or a crime, or suspicious in the United States of America. Can a kid not go out to the convenience store to get some Skittles in the rain with his hoodie on to keep off the rain? That's suspicious? Listen to more of the tape.
Black or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
Yeah, a dark hoodie, like a gray hoodie, and either jeans or sweatpants and white tennis shoes. He's here now. He was just staring.
Oh, he's just walking around the area?
At all the houses.
Okay.
And now he's just staring at me.
Okay, and so it's 1111 Retrieview or 111?
That's the clubhouse.
That's the clubhouse. Do you know what he's near the clubhouse right now?
Yeah, now he's coming towards me.
Okay.
He's got his hand in his waistband. Yeah, he's a black male.
Okay. How old would you say he is?
He's got a button on his shirt. Late teens.
Late teens, okay.
Something's wrong with him. Yep. He's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Okay, just let me know if he does anything, okay?
Over here.
Yeah, we got him.
Again, what does he say? He says there's something wrong with him. I don't know what his deal is. He's got something in his hands. He's walking around in the rain. He's got something in his hands. We now know that he had iced tea and Skittles and that he was looking to try to find the apartment that he left that he wasn't familiar with. You know the situation. I do too. You ever been to someone's house you've never been to before? It's in one of those developments where all the places look the same, and you're coming back to it and you're like, was it D4 or was it C4? Is it this apartment or that apartment? It's dark, it's raining, it's confusing, it's humid. But for George Zimmerman, that was something wrong. Listen to how he prejudges Trayvon Martin before he ever meets him.
We got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
Okay. These assholes, they always get away. Yeah.
I'm not going to repeat what he said, but you heard it. These people, these a-holes, always get away. Again, listen to how he prejudges Trayvon Martin before he even sees him. I think that knowing what's in George Zimmerman's mind is not that hard. He's saying so on the 911 call.
When you come to the clubhouse, you come straight in and make a left. Actually, you would go past the clubhouse.
It says on the left-hand side from the clubhouse?
No, you go in straight through the entrance, and then you make a left. You go straight in, don't turn and make a left. Shit, he's running.
He's running? Which way is he running?
Down towards the other entrance of the neighborhood.
Okay, which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
Now that, of course, is the part everyone's talking about. Are you following him? Yes. Okay, we don't need you to do that. And you hear the heavy breathing? George Zimmerman's running after him. Now, who had more reason to fear? Who had more reason, frankly, to pull a gun in self-defense? The guy who's looking around for someone who's in the dark, who seems to be confused? Or someone who's walking in, you're looking to try to find where your mom is staying, and some guy you've never seen before is running after you? Who had more reason to be afraid? The pursued or the pursuer?
All right, sir, what is your name?
George. He ran.
He ran. He got away.
George, what's your last name?
Zimmerman.
And George, what's the phone number you're calling from?
You hear he's out of breath.
407-435-2400.
All right, George, would you have them on the way? Do you want to meet with the officer when they get out there?
Yeah.
All right, where are you going to meet with them at?
If they come in through the...
Actually, I don't think the rest of the tape is as important. You can listen to it yourself, and I encourage you to do so. I also encourage you to listen to all the 911 tapes, all the people that called in. One of them, these are some harsh things, and I guess discretion is definitely advised. You can hear someone screaming for help, and you hear the caller say that they're too frightened to go out and help. As I said, we may never know the details of exactly what happened that night. And obviously there needs to be a full investigation. But there's the pursued and the pursuer. And perhaps the pursuer, George Zimmerman, felt he had the right to pursue because he had a gun, and because Florida has a law called the Stand Your Ground Law, which others call the Shoot First Law. Shoot first, ask questions later. Some have called them the Kill at Will Law. This idea that when you're in your home and someone breaks in, you can shoot them makes some sense. But when you're walking around the street and you see something strange, you can shoot it? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And yet these are the laws in dozens of states. Not only do we need to investigate this particular matter, but let's face it, we need to get rid of these laws. There's another place on earth much more dangerous than Florida, where people are being shot, one right after the other. That, of course, I'm talking about is Syria. Here's a photo from the most recent massacre in Syria, showing people, their hands tied behind their back, and they're shot, and they're lying in the dirt. The journalists who took this photo are in themselves in danger. Syria has, in fact, murdered a number of Western journalists for the crime of covering their massacres. There are some on the left and on the right that say don't get involved. It's not our issue. If Syrians are killing Syrians, why should we care? And I got to say, I don't think it's a left or right issue. There are people on both sides that say that. There are others that say, well, let's just let the world bodies do their work. Well, the United Security Council doesn't do anything because Syria is Russia's ally. Russia and China have vetoed it. Yes, we have sanctions. The sanctions are good. But people are being murdered every single day in Syria. And I think it's time that we do something about it. Arab countries and the United States are giving some aid to some of the Free Syrian Army, not giving military aid, just some money. I don't think that's enough. I think we need to stop the massacres. Now, there are others from the school of Realpolitik. There's actually an article by Henry Kissinger that say, hey, we don't really know who these people are. Maybe we can't trust them. You know what? Henry Kissinger's right. We don't really know what the agenda is. We don't really know where this is all going to lead. But I don't have a problem saying we should stop people from being massacred. I don't have a problem with that. You could argue that that's a good idea for American foreign policy, that if we help people in need, they will remember that. And when and if they overthrow the evil dictator, Assad, when they do that, then they might remember the United States. We might have an ally, a democratic ally for life. I certainly hope that's the case. But I don't need that reason. I don't need that guarantee to intervene. I don't know where the revolution in Libya is going to lead. I don't know if it's going to lead to a democratic government. But I do know that Gaddafi had set out to murder his own people. And I do know we were right to intervene. Not to invade. I didn't support the war in Iraq. Not to go in and invade and take over the country, but to help the people overthrow their own leaders. It was the right thing to do in Syria. It was the right thing to do in Libya. It is also the right thing to do in Syria. We need to act, and we need to act quickly. Because otherwise, people are going to say, where was America? We can't help everything in the world. I understand that. We can't help the Tibetans who are brutally mistreated by the Chinese because we don't have power to defeat the Chinese. But when we can make a difference, we should. That's not a question of left or right. That's a question of right or wrong. This is Mark Levine. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to comment on the show, go to my website, marklevinetalk.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at marklevinetalk, and go to the Mark Levine fan page on Facebook. And I'll see you next time right here on The Inside Scoop.